Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's What's Possible Bitesize. Martin's not with us this week. He's taken a well-deserved holiday. But as he would say if he were here, it is great to have another session where we bring What's Possible content to you from thought-provoking, insightful, sometimes controversial, but always helpful presentations. And to use his catchphrase, no fluff, no guff, just lots of useful stuff. So this afternoon's presentation, not my catchphrase, it's his. This afternoon's presentation is from Giraffe Insights. Sadie and Maxine will introduce themselves in a second, but just a bit of admin from me. Today's session, we will keep to 45 minutes so that everybody can keep their day planned as expected. The contact details for Maxine and Sadie will be on the screen at the end, so you can contact them for further information about this presentation, more services that they offer as a business, and to get a copy of the presentation. And as always, all participants in the session will be muted, but there is a chat box where you can ask questions, and we always actively encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. And then what I'll do at the end of the presentation is I will curate those questions to make sure that we get enough time to answer, or we, Maxine and Sadie, get enough time to answer the questions that we've got. So without any further ado, I will pass over to Maxine and Sadie, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, particularly when it's such glorious weather outside. So as Mark said, we are Giraffe Insights, and we're thrilled to be here as part of the What's Possible webinar series. So who's going to be taking you on this journey today? Well, it will be myself, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Maxine Fox, and I head up Giraffe Insights. I've been leading a dedicated team at Giraffe for over 6 years now. Prior to that, actually working in pharmaceutical research and also at the BBC. And I have with me my talented colleague, who I will let introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sadie Buckingham Maxine at Giraffe Insights. I actually head up the quantitative element, and I've been involved in these stakeholder projects, of which we're going to share one of them, insights from one of them with you today, and I'm super excited to be able to share them.
So for those of you who have not heard of Giraffe before, for those of you who have, we'll give you a little bit of a recap. But who are we? Well, we're a kids, youth and family specialist research agency. So what we do is we're obviously speaking a lot to children and younger people. But of course, as part of that audience as well, we do a lot of work with adults too. So speaking to parents and speaking to other key influencers within that space. And there's two strands to our business. So the first strand is Bespoke Research, and where we're answering individual client business needs. And we do this across and using a number of different tools. So whether that be quantitative research or qualitative research conducted in the UK or across international markets. And the types of tools that we have range from anything from engaging online surveys, through to ethnographic apps, of course, your focus groups and your in-depth interviews as well. However, as you won't be surprised, these have obviously changed recently, given our current circumstances, and a lot of what we're doing right now is conducted online. And then the second strand of our business are our in-house syndicated studies, and the first of these is our Little Voices study. And this is a survey that we run with young people and with parents too every other month. So that actually offers brands the opportunity to have this regular contact with younger audiences and parents too. This looks at anything from sort of top brands, purchasing behaviours, Christmas purchasing, aspirations. It covers the sort of whole breadth of their worlds. And then the one that we're going to be sharing with you today is our Kids and the Screen research. So this is a big piece of research that we launched 3 years ago, and this looks to provide the full picture of video consumption for kids aged 2 to 12 years old. So let's kick this off then. And as I say, the research that we're focusing on today is our Kids and the Screen piece, Changing the Channel. And what we wanted to do to sort of intro this to you before Sadie takes you through some of the key insights is actually let you know why we started this project in the first place. So 3 years ago, we were getting asked the same questions time and time again by our clients in terms of wanting to be able to understand the full picture of what kids were viewing across both linear channels, but online as well, and through on-demand platforms. And there wasn't this one consolidated data source where they could go to and really see this entire picture. So that's why we launched Kids and the Screen. It was to provide a study that multiple brands could invest in order to be able to see this full picture of video consumption. And now, because it's been running for 3 years, we're actually looking at data that's covering over 70,000 viewing occasions. So there's a lot of data that sits behind this. And unfortunately, you know, we've only got a short period of time this morning. What we'll do is share some of the sort of key insights, but there's a lot more that sits behind it. And in terms of the sample and the methodology, the sample, we speak to 2,000 children aged 2 to 12 years old, and we do this across 2 points in the year. So we speak to 2,000 children in the October time, and then another 2,000 children in the sort of April time. And we make sure that we cover those 2 key viewing periods. So we go across both term time and holiday time, and that October half term, which is key, and also looking at the Easter holiday period as well. This is slightly different in terms of methodology to other studies, and we dual recruit both the parent and the child. And so at that younger age, obviously the parent has a lot more involvement. But what we ask them to do is to record each and every time they view any video content. So whether that be a live TV show on the channel, whether that be a 2-hour film on Netflix or a 2-minute clip on YouTube. They record everything that they view in that one occasion. And they don't tell us about it afterwards, but they later on in the day, but they do it straight after that viewing occasion has occurred. If they've gone on to view something else, they then repeat the same set of questions about the next piece of content that they viewed. So this really does give us a true picture of what's going on. And as I say, we've got a lot of viewing occasions now over the last 3 years that we're able to base these trends on. And what you'll see as Sadie takes you through is that this covers things like the type of content they're viewing, the platform and device they use, the channels they're watching, and who they're watching with, but importantly, the ads that they recall as well. So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll hand you over to Sadie, who will take you through some of these key insights.
Thanks, Maxine. So the first section is actually going to be looking at how kids are consuming content, the different platforms they're using, but also touching upon this really important ritual that exists across the day. So the first thing is to show you this sort of the viewing pattern throughout the day. This is actually showing 3 years worth of data over the October period, and Maxine said it's around 70,000 occasions, so it's a huge amount of data. And when we actually look at the data points, there's only 1 or 2% differences throughout those different years, and I think this just goes to show the consistency that really is within that daily ritual. And it's important to understand this ritual because it's about understanding where those peaks of viewing are so that we can maintain that reach and engagement with any communication going out to this important audience. But we also know that kids like to utilize lots of different platforms. They're very good at navigating to the content that they want and navigating the different platforms to be able to get to it. And actually, live TV, online, and SVOD, so subscription VOD or on demand, is all very important. It's all made up in equal measures in terms of the type of content that they're accessing, but they're all utilised for very different needs. So live TV is utilised for a bit of a timestamp. There's that ritual involved, and they do get their family favourites, particularly at the weekend or in the evenings, and that shared family time. Online gives them something completely different to SVOD and live TV, and it's more linked to that alone time, but also interests and hobbies. They can go in and search for things that are very specific to them. And SVOD, the likes of Netflix, they go in and they can access tailor-made content for them, allows binge watching, but there's an important need for the parents here as well, in terms of it offers them a safe place to be able to binge watch. And these kids are utilising all of these different platforms and are actually working together very well as it stands. And when we look at online viewing and SVOD viewing, we do see that there is a major player for both of these. So YouTube actually makes up 2/3 of all online viewing, and this hasn't changed over the last couple of years. And Netflix is a major player with over the last 2 years too. So they've very much been able to deliver the content that kids are asking for, and therefore very much dominate this sort of kids space within both of these types of platforms. And we also know that in terms of devices, kids just want to watch on the big screen. So 2/3 of all occasions that they're accessing video content, they're accessing it through that big screen TV device. And we did think at the beginning of the study, we've been running it for a few years, that there would be a shift. There's lots of conversations in the industry about it shifting to more mobile devices, but this isn't true in terms of the video content. So they're still accessing video content on that TV set, and it's kind of maintained that 72, 73, 74% ownership of all content throughout the last few years. But it's not all the same. We know that live TV has decreased over the last couple of years, and on demand and online has increased. But all it means is that they are now streaming and moving some of that content they were watching before through into that big screen device. And it is the digital movement, if you like, that's enabled us to do that, connected TVs, that is allowing kids to still watch in this way. And ultimately, this is the way that kids want to watch video content. But we need to think about the needs as well, and this is often what drives the platforms that they're picking. And it won't be a surprise that the favourite content is the top need, but there are some other important needs too, which is also defining and sometimes restraining some of the differences and trends that we're seeing. So part of the daily routine, that timestamp, is very important with kids of this age, and that is very much linked to the likes of live TV. Spending time with the family, again, more live TV in terms of some of that evening and weekend time that they can spend together. And then a very important one is safety, and the parents being able to leave their child alone to watch video content without having to supervise them, or a bit linked to that big screen TV that they can watch it over the shoulder just to make sure there's no dodgy content coming through. But we can show you some of the shifts that we're seeing in the lockdown period, because we've been lucky that where the fieldwork lays, we've been able to actually conduct the fieldwork for the latest wave within lockdown period. And the shifts that we're seeing are very interesting, but what we'll cover is where we think some of these shifts are here to stay and what is specific potentially just for that lockdown period. But before we take you through to show you the shifts that have changed during lockdown, I think it's worth just going back and recapping what it looked like before. And this is that similar chart that I showed you at the beginning, in terms of there is a peak at the morning and a peak in that late afternoon and early evening when they get back from school. But during lockdown, it has actually changed. And this is very important, given the last 3 years have been identical to this. It's shifted to be a little bit later on. They're accessing video content later on. They're watching it more throughout the morning until that late afternoon. And we're not seeing that same peak in that late afternoon as we did do before. And what we know from this is that there are different needs occurring and different needs emerging through this lockdown period, which is driving some of this change. And some of that, so kind of around 12 o'clock, we know that there is a mental switch off from the parents that actually they do need their child to be distracted and they do need to be entertained so that that parent can get back to some of the work. And actually there is this new need now coming through for new content and really entertaining content to keep them distracted whilst the parent can get on with something else. But this is very important to understand the reach and engagement in terms of when is it best to be able to target and communicate with kids compared with before lockdown. But something else we can see with kids in the screen is that, as Maxine mentioned, we have conducted this research over 3 years and we conduct it 2 waves each year. So it actually means we have 6 waves of data, and wave 6 is what was conducted during lockdown. And it enables us to be able to not just see what's happened, but also where we think this is going to continue as well. And as we can see, if you look between wave 5 and wave 6, actually SVOD, so subscription on demand, is actually increasing, and it's an increasing rate as well. And it's actually doubled its ownership over the last 2 years in terms of the viewing that it's able to own. Live TV has declined, but what's very interesting about this is the online video. And if we were to go back to wave 2 and wave 3 and extrapolate that data, we would actually have placed ownership of online to be more where SVOD is now. But it isn't, and that's because of the important needs that I mentioned earlier in terms of that gatekeeper effect, because online does have a slightly less kind of attitude towards it in terms of screen time. There's a negative or stigma attached to the screen time with online, and there's also a safety aspect as well in terms of it can't just be left on in the background. Some parents are worried about where that child might end up if they start to navigate through the different shows. But it is important to understand not just where we are now, but also get an idea of where we will be in the future to be able to predict that change and ensure that we stay ahead. But there is a reason why SVOD is increasing in the way that we see, and it's because it does deliver on that binge watching material, and they can go in and select. It's almost like a blueprint for what it is that they want to watch, because they can go in and type the specific show that they want. They don't have to wait like live TV for the show that they expect to come on. They can go on, search for it, and then not just watch one episode, but potentially several after the other. And it's also offering that safe need as well in terms of the parent can put them in front of that screen and the child can navigate through potentially more safe material than it would be online. But as I mentioned as well, there is this new need coming through for new content, particularly during lockdown, and that is because they need to keep these children entertained, need to keep them distracted whilst they get on with something else. And Disney Plus has really turned up at the right moment, and we were able to capture within this research, Kids in the Screen, who's watching it, the kind of the ownership that it has over the viewing at the moment, where it's watched, what channels are, what shows are being watched, and the role that it plays. And this is definitely kind of capturing, if you like, the new content need that's coming through. But there's another need in terms of spending time together as well, because of the economy at the moment. Platforms and subscriptions aren't just for the child or for the parent, therefore both of them to be enjoyed together, and actually Disney Plus kind of fills that void. So Disney's come at a great time to be able to satisfy some of these SVODs needs that's come through. And as I mentioned before, we know that kids are watching and very savvy at being able to negotiate and watch the different platforms like online, SVOD and live TV to be able to fulfill different needs. But they even do that within SVOD itself. When we're looking at how they're viewing Netflix, it's more likely to be a TV program, and they're more likely to be watching it on their own. But with Disney, it's a different story. It's more likely to be films, and it's more likely about 2/3 of those occasions are more likely to be watched with their parents, which fits in with these new needs in terms of spending time together. Another pattern that we're seeing is this movement towards educational content. And we're seeing this both with the content that they're accessing from live TV and also online. And the kids learning genre has actually increased, and it doesn't look like a lot here, but actually the ownership has doubled over the last couple of years. And this is a pattern that we only see getting stronger. And I think there's two things that are happening. There's the immediate surge, which is to do with the likes of Joe Wicks and that PE and the role that it plays in that morning period. But there's also a movement towards the like of Little Baby Bum and Coco Melon and Blippi. And these shows, which are kind of marrying up education and entertainment, are actually the kind of bridging the gap between what the child wants and what the adult wants. And we can only see this type of content becoming more important and more sought after as parents realise that actually there is an option for them where they don't have that same stigma around screen time, that there is a benefit potentially for them tuning in. But we also need to consider as well, in terms of the communications that we send out, the screen, the platform that it goes out on, but also that form of content to be able to maximise that reach and engagement and essentially the brand cut through. So in terms of time spent, and it's very much linked to the occasions as well, around 75% of time that they're spending watching video content is watched on the big screen device. And we know as well they're watching these things for different reasons. So for the big screen, it's very much about the different platforms. So live TV, SVOD, PVOD, so on demand, are all utilised within that big screen to be able to get the content that they want. The little screen acts in a very different way. So it's predominantly online that they're watching to get to that specific hobbies and interests content that they want. So it's big screen for different platforms of kind of TV programs, little screen for online website. And that's because there are different needs that are involved too. So for the big screen, it is about that favourite content and spending time with the family and being part of that daily routine. But for the little screen, although content still comes out on top, it is more for that time alone and for that kind of escapism. They're very much used for that just a time apart, which has an impact in terms of the advert recall. So we actually, with kids in the screen, for every single consumption occasion, content consumption occasion that they access, we do ask them at that point, did you remember seeing an advert? Yes or no? And actually for both big screen and little screen, 1 out of 10 kids will remember an advert. And we were actually expecting the big screen to be much bigger, but actually it's the same. So there's the same proportion of kids remembering adverts whilst they're watching big screen versus the little screen. But what they are remembering is different. So product recall and the specifics and the granularity around the product is actually greater when they're watching it on the TV. And it's not just that that's different either, it's the types of things that they're remembering. So on the big screen, they're remembering around toys, specific brands, kids products and TV shows. And that is because if you think of the type of content that they're watching on there, it's much more cartoons, preschool, animated shows. And the cartoons and the TV adverts that we're placing have been positioned very well. And we spent time and money trying to place the right advert at the right time. So it just shows that is effective and we are communicating and resonating in the right way on that big screen device. But this is different when we look at the little screen, because actually the adverts that resonate most on the little screen are the content-led adverts. So the likes of TikTok, reviews, movie trailers, and sort of gaming apps. And that's because they're also watching a very diverse range of things on YouTube. And what they're recalling is diverse, but it's also content-led. And we need to just consider this moving forwards in terms of the type of adverts that we're placing on both the big screen and the little screen to be able to ensure that they're resonating in the best way. Because ultimately, when you think about time spent, the big screen makes up 7 out of 10 adverts that are recalled in total, and the little screen is 24%. So it's about understanding of the different adverts that we're placing and the different types of adverts that we're placing, what's the best way we can communicate our message using both of these important platforms to be able to maximize that success of the message and the resonation.
Great. Thanks, Sadie. So back to me now. So in terms of sort of bringing all of this together, in terms of some of the key things to take away with you today, we've obviously taken you across viewing and where we've seen viewing going across the 3 years, and then sort of dipped our toes in the water when it comes to lockdown and some of the shifts we've seen. And then at the end there, focused more on brand cut through. So what should you take away with you? Well, what you can see there is that kids have a real eclectic media mix in terms of the types of platforms that they're accessing. But what we know is that prior to lockdown, there was a really strong viewing ritual that existed across the day, and that really this hadn't changed across those 5 waves. And this is because actually they can switch seamlessly between the platforms, and it just becomes part of their viewing repertoire. And they know across the day what sort of content they want to watch and where to find it. We often hear when we talk to children and young people about different platforms, actually they don't see them as different platforms. They very much see them just as part of their viewing repertoire, so that they can switch between channels to access their favourite content. And what's really important is that brands go with them on this journey. You saw there that in terms of subscription video on demand services, across the kids in the screen waves, that actually you've seen SVOD continually increase. What's happened over the lockdown period is that this has actually only been exaggerated further. This is largely driven pre-lockdown by preschool content. So actually parents, as Sadie said, being able to go on, feel comfortable that their children are in a safe environment, and to watch this type of edutainment content, which the likes of Netflix has become very good at, with actually shows that started on YouTube now also existing on Netflix. But what we've seen over lockdown is that we've got a new player that's come in. So we know that Netflix has been the biggest subscription video on demand player for kids so far, but Disney Plus has come in at a really timely moment. And what it's doing is it's actually fulfilling a different need. So we see this where they're using Disney Plus to actually view much more film content, and they're actually watching together as a family. So currently at the moment, what we see is that Netflix and Disney Plus can actually coexist alongside each other, fulfilling these very different needs. And then our final point there is around this platform and screen size. So we can't forget about the device. Often devices sort of seem a little bit like old hat, but we can't forget about the device and the screen that they're viewing content on. And it will be a mixture of the device and what that means about the platform that they're viewing and the type of content that they're viewing too. So for instance, we know that on the smaller screen, it tends to be that they're viewing from online websites such as YouTube. And this will be largely on their own, and they'll be viewing content that's very individual to them. So that means that the brands that they remember and the brands that engage and resonate most tend to fit with that sort of viewing environment. As I alluded to at the beginning, there's obviously a lot of data that exists behind this kids in the screen research. And today we really have only just been able to scratch the surface. Now at Giraffe Insights, we obviously conduct bespoke research that answers individual client needs alongside offering access to these syndicated research pieces. So if you've got any questions that you need answering as a business, we would love to hear them. particularly at the moment, what we're getting a lot of is brands actually needing very quick turnaround questions that they want to know sort of in the moment. And this is certainly something that we can offer here at Giraffe Insights. We've also put together some lockdown special packages. So actually looking at this latest wave of data, both across kids in the screen in terms of viewing and understanding a lot more, for instance, about Disney Plus and what sits behind that, but also in terms of our Little Voices surveys as well, and looking at the latest wave of that, and for instance, how lockdown has impacted parents' purchasing, but importantly, where parents actually see that going in the future. You know, we're fast approaching Q4, so, you know, where do parents see their Christmas spend going? And then finally, actually having this sort of annual access to both of these studies. This is something that we offer, and we offer this through access to our interactive dashboard. So brands can actually go in and access all of the data that sits behind these two studies, but they can filter it and they can look at audiences that are of most interest to them. So there's a number of different things that we work on with our clients as a business. And as I say, we would love to hear more from you. So thank you very much for listening to our presentation today. And I'll now hand back over to Mark for the questions.
Thank you so much. I'm scribbling notes down frantically there because I found it incredibly fascinating. There is so much to take away from that in terms of this audience clearly being the consumers and the media consumers of tomorrow, and how their behaviours are dictated now and learned will only exacerbate as they get older because they will take them with them. And I think that has a very interesting implication for most of the people listening today, which will be advertisers and brands. I think, you know, I'll come on and talk about SVOD in a minute, because obviously by definition, all of those are non-advertising opportunities. So, but the first question to ask on that is, where do you see viewing behaviours continuing to grow? You mentioned about the growth of SVOD, and Sadie said about the extrapolation of online, but where do you see this going in terms of moving forward over the next few years?
So I think we definitely will continue to see subscription video on demand thrive. In terms of starting to take away some more of those sort of live TV occasions. But ultimately, you know, following this lockdown period, no doubt some families will be looking at their household budgets and thinking about which subscriptions they keep and which they don't. Now, what we know is that Disney Plus at the moment is satisfying a very different need to Netflix. So it looks as though that is something that can stick around for this family need. And when we've spoken to families and children about a positive thing that's come out of lockdown, it's been that they very much enjoyed spending time together as a family. And even as we emerge out of this, want to try to continue that in terms of spending time together as much as they can. So the likes of that sort of family entertainment need is likely to stick around. So I do think we will continue to see this sort of SVOD go from strength to strength. I don't know, Sadie, if you had anything else to add on that one.
Just, I guess, a small bit would be as well, because of the lockdown and there has been an increase in viewing, it would be interesting to see, because parents have had to kind of compromise and negotiate themselves around this negative screen time attitude, and they've probably found like them spending time together and this entertainment type genre have found an avenue to be able to increase that screen time back up again. So I think it'll be interesting to see if screen time goes back to the levels it was pre-lockdown, or it goes in a middle space somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. And that's probably an important point to make. Nobody's saying that chart that we showed during the lockdown period, where viewing is a lot more consistent across the day, you know, we know as kids start to go back to school and we all start to get back to the office, that actually, you know, that won't maintain itself as it is. But as Sadie says, it will be interesting to see whether screen time does go back to what we've seen previously, or whether we see, you know, more of a sort of slight decline or even a slight increase.
Yeah, I mean, I think that chart surprised me, because it kind of implied that there was actually less viewing, probably more sustained, but less viewing during lockdown than normal, which as a father of 3 kids myself that have been locked down here for the last 14 weeks, I have to say personally, we've been a little bit more lax in terms of the control and strict limits on how much TV or screen time the kids can have. But I think that links to one of the questions that's come through in terms of do you get a sense from your research that kids care about advertising, or what's their attitude towards advertising? Obviously, some of it's content driven. So you called out Disney Plus and Netflix having the right content, some of it being educational, some of it being entertaining. Obviously, there's YouTube, which there's a question which we'll ask about the safety and policing of that. But do you capture or look at any form of children's attitude towards advertising?
Yeah, so obviously it differs across the ages. An important point to note is that a 2-year-old is very, very different to a 12-year-old. A 2-year-old is very different to a 4-year-old. But speaking quite generally in terms of kids and advertising, they're very aware and they're very honest. So if they're not being engaged by a brand or an ad, they'll simply switch off in whichever way they want to, whether that's just looking away, whether that's leaving the room and coming back, if they're watching recorded, fast forwarding. So it is really all about hooking them in. And we know that kids love things like, particularly at the younger age, they love music, they love actually seeing other kids like them, they love the language to be directed at them. And sort of building a story and a narrative that almost sort of lends itself to the content that they're viewing. But they're very honest in terms of if they're not interested, they will just switch off. But for those ones that really engage them, they'll happily sort of interact with it.
Okay, I mean, I think you've just answered one of the questions that's come through, which is the difficulty or challenges that you face of trying to get 2 to 4-year-old feedback, but I think you've just addressed that, so I'll skip over that one. But there's a question come through from Rupert Bean that says, is there any dramatic shift regionally with any of this interesting data? In particular, does the London and South East have any marked differences to the rest of the country?
No, it's always quite flat. It seems to be this ritual and the behaviours that we see are generally seen across the country, and no real regional differences.
And do you look at the data regionally as well? I mean, do you?
Yeah, so that's why we have such a large base. So it allows us to look at quite a lot of demographics that we include in the recruitment, and especially in the first year that we did it, we delved quite a lot into the demographics, and then that's almost what we've got this big understanding now around the ritual of viewing, because we were trying to find differences that were emerging, and in the end it was like actually everyone's kind of doing the same thing, and that's why quite a lot of it is the same. But we do have a lot of the kind of the demographic detail behind this data.
It was really important when we launched this 3 years ago, with the likes of, Barb and Comscore and us coming to the table with something a little bit different here, that actually it was just as robust as those measurement systems as well. So as Sadie says, having that large enough sample where we could do exactly that and look regionally, look at different demographics.
So there's a couple of questions around ad recall. Obviously, you said that ad recall to this group on the big screen and the small screen stays at around 10%.
Yeah.
Sort of conflating a couple of questions together. The big screen that you said 29% of that is live viewing and 28% of that is SVOD. So the SVOD won't have advertising on it. So that 10% ad recall, they're only seeing 29% of live TV with adverts in it. So
it's about commercial time as well. So something that we can also do with Kids in the Screen. We've not shared those slides on this particular occasion, but I can voice them over. Is that we were also able to look at commercial time. It's not just time spent, but there was time spent on commercial channels. And live TV still makes up around a half of all those adverts recalled. So it's still a very important platform to be able to utilise and get your message across, followed by online.
And that's something that we're very aware of in terms of, it's important that brands know where kids are going and at what time of day they are using non-commercial platforms and the type of content that they view there. But obviously in terms of ads and where you're going to be placed, it's that commercial picture which is going to be of most interest.
well, I think Lindsay, Clay, and everybody at Thinkbox will be very happy that they're still watching commercial television and commercial impacts are going there. So just probing more on the ad recall, though, because obviously we've got a lot of advertisers today that are marketing to this audience or dual marketing to this audience with their parents. 10% seems a relatively low figure for ad recall. Linking that with two questions that have come through, what advice would you give to advertisers trying to market to this audience? And the second part of that question, is there a need for increased frequency to this audience because of the repetitive nature? So does high frequency of ad exposure of the same ad increase or decrease the ad recall amongst this audience?
What was the first part of your question? Sorry, Mark, before you...
Sorry, I'm trying to get through all the questions, so I'm linking a couple of them together. Ad recall's only 10%.
Yeah.
So for advertisers that are trying to market to this audience... Yeah.
What would we advise?
What would you advise? I know with respect, you're a research company, but what insights could you give to marketeers trying to market to this audience? And part of that is it an increased amount of frequency? Does that have a positive effect on this audience?
So in terms of what we advise, it is very much that because we know that kids are switching so seamlessly between these different ways to view, that you really do need to stay on that journey with them. And it's not about just showing them the same ad across all. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. So as we've seen there in terms of size of screen and knowing where they're viewing at that time, so if they're viewing online through the likes of YouTube or they're live on a TV channel, actually what's going to work for them is going to be very different. We know that the product comes through more strongly on live TV, but that actually you can do a very good immersive branding piece when it comes to online. But you do need to structure those ads around the needs that those different viewing occasions are satisfying. So when they're going onto YouTube and they're looking at things which are more personal to them, and they're doing it more on their own, it's targeting them in that way.
Okay.
I can add to that too as well, because I think there's also an element of understanding. So you need to understand who you target audiences, because we do a lot of creative testing, and it's about understanding of the messages or of the imagery or the language, because one fan of one brand might be very different to another fan of another brand. So it's about identifying of that creative, which elements should we push up for that brand versus another one. So it's a two-prong attack. I think you need to understand the end user and what's going to resonate, but also understand what form that should take to be able to cut through all the other noise.
Cool. I'm conscious of time, so we've got 3 minutes left. So again, pulling three questions together just so that we can get through these ones. How do I do this? So obviously, okay, so the three questions I'm going to pull together are around advertising to kids. SVOD, obviously there's no advertising, yet it takes up 28% on the big screen of all time viewed. Linking that then, so the advertising opportunities for marketeers are on live terrestrial television or satellite broadcast channels, or through YouTube. But obviously YouTube is a channel which is open to children being able to see other content than what their parents want to watch. So how does the advertisers come around that, and what does your research show about parental behavior? I know you touched on it, but what does your research show about parental behavior of kids watching YouTube versus watching SVOD or even live TV?
Yeah, so to say that not as different as you might think. They might say that there's this concern and they'll be over the shoulder watching, but actually when you look at who they're watching with, because we gather that as well in terms of is their parent there, and often they are on their own still watching YouTube, and we have been collecting YouTube Kids, and actually there's been a slight decline over some of the years. It's gone up in lockdown. So again, if safety was an issue, they would be putting them onto YouTube Kids, but because a couple of videos are still sneaking onto that with the sort of the safety, and the content isn't quite where YouTube is, they're actually still moving towards YouTube. So I think that answers one thing in terms of it. There's still that convenience which overrides the safety aspect in some instances.
I think as well that it depends on age. So yes, whilst we see that in terms of when they're on YouTube, actually parents are letting them do it on their own, regardless of what they say. And we often hear differently from parents in terms of if you ask them the question, do you feel it's safe to let them on YouTube on their own? The answer isn't always yes, but we do see that that's the way they view online. But we do know that in terms of time restrictions on screen time, they tend to be more heavily placed on that online viewing, as it were. Because we've got a lot of this sort of educational or preschool content that's driving them to the likes of Netflix. Actually, it's less of a guilty screen time that parents see it as. So it sort of depends on the content as well, but the age of child too.
Okay, I mean, I think there's an irony there, because I think if you're researching 2 to 12-year-olds, I don't think anybody in that group is actually old enough to legally have a YouTube account.
No,
but
exactly.
let's leave it on that one, because that's beyond the confines of either of us two. So so it's exactly 2:45, so we've done our 45 minutes. Thank you both to Sadie and Maxine from Giraffe Insights. For anybody that wants to find out more about what they do, their business, their proposition, and the research insights, the information's on screen, and we'll be sharing the information and contact information out after this. The only other thing to say is that our presentation next week is with, I'm trying to move the chart on, is with Lord Mark Price, who is a retail guru who has spent most of his career at Waitrose and the John Lewis Partnership, where he was deputy chairman before being elevated to a peerage. And next week we'll be having a fireside chat with him, talking about all things going on in the retail space. But for now, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And again, thanks to Maxine and Sadie from Giraffe. Thanks very much.
Thank you.